What if 2025 could be the year that everything changes? The year that you stop just going through the motions and finally start living a life that feels alive, aligned, and deeply fulfilling. If you're feeling stuck or maybe disconnected from your true self, weighed down with self-doubt, or maybe even just a little bit bored, I want you to know it doesn't have to stay this way. With my neurofulfillment framework, we will make 2025 your breakthrough year. Together, we'll rediscover your unique vision, help you build an unshakable belief in yourself, and create a fantastic plan that's both empowering and true to who you really are. Imagine waking up excited about your life, trusting your decisions, and moving towards your goals with clarity and confidence. If that sounds like the year you want to create, I'd love to help you get started. Book a free discovery call with me today and let's make your 2025 the best year yet. Head down to the link below to schedule your call. What's up, everybody? I'm Monica, certified life purpose coach and huge neuro nerd. I am obsessed with understanding how the brain works and breaking it down into actionable steps to help you live a better, more fulfilling life. Every week, I will be here with my co-host, life partner, and best friend, Austin, to share our biggest insights and science-backed tips to help you step into the driver's seat and become the creator of your life. Make sure you hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode drop. Let's get ready to dive in. All right, Neuro Nerds, welcome back to another episode of the Notes from a Neuro Nerd, the science behind living your best life. We are going to have a little bit of a heavier topic here, but I'm so excited to be here with Amy, who is such an expert and such just a light in this world. I've been getting to know her a little bit before starting this recording, and I am already so excited for you guys to get to know her. I do want to throw out a little bit of a trigger warning before we get started. Amy has a really amazing story to tell us. But she did go through a lot of emotional and mental abuse. And so there is a just that trigger warning of abuse. So just take care of yourself. Just, pay attention. Know that if you need to skip this episode, that is 100% okay. And when you're in the right time and place and headspace for this episode, it will always be here for you. But for those of you who are able to stick around today, I want to introduce you to Amy. Amy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation with you. We were talking that it's super exciting to see that this topic is becoming, more prevalent and more front-faced than it used to be. And I know it's a hard topic, but it's so needed in order to really reverse a lot of the numbers that we're seeing in this space. And so, I'm just so happy to be a part of that and to, that I've gotten the courage to be able to tell my story and help as many people as I possibly can through everything that I went through, at least, I went through everything for something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking a little bit before this podcast started about how abuse sometimes is so hidden and how we feel like, it must not be abuse because they're not hitting me, or it must not be abuse because I feel like I could say no. But a lot of times there's like kind of that underlying manipulation factor. So I'm really excited to kind of get into that a little bit more. But before we go there, before we get ahead of ourselves, why don't you go ahead and introduce ourselves to the audience?
Yeah, so my name is Amy Pease, and I am the founder of Passion from Pain. And my mission and my passion is to help those who have, suffered mental abuse, or even, run-of-the-mill domestic violence, whatever it is, whatever kind of abuse they'd been through, or some kind of traumatic situation, and help them find the courage to overcome themselves afterwards, because we are very different people once we leave that situation, and we don't recognize who we are anymore. Looking at ourselves in the mirror, we're not looking at the same person that we thought we were. And so having the courage and the strength to, rediscover who we are and then get back to who we were is all about what I'm trying to do and help people understand, and that there is life after the abuse. We get out of our situations and we think life is going to be perfect again. They're gone. And oh my God, I'm going to live my life again. But what we're not prepared for is the depression and the anxiety and the trust issues that are just going to hit us. And it's a natural thing that comes with the nervous system and the rewiring of, our brains and our entire systems. And so that's my big mission, is to help people realize that we do have to go through this process. As much as we don't want to face it, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Absolutely. I've been through it. But at the end of it, there's so much reward and so much strength and so much courage. And that's what I'm all about now, is helping people find that in themselves again. So
Yeah, beautiful. And you are such a testament to life afterwards, to picking yourself back up, finding your purpose, finding your passion, and living this beautiful life despite everything. And maybe because of everything that you have been through, where I think is so needed for people to see you at the end of it, because sometimes it feels like a really hard journey. And it just seems like this huge mountain that we have to climb to first of all, get out of the situation can be really hard. Second of all, to understand the effects that it had on you, and then to go through it, all of that healing process can be a lot. And so I really appreciate you being here from the other end, being like, you guys, it's great over here. Just keep going, just keep climbing that mountain. And the work you're doing is so incredible. So thank you. I mean, again, I think I've thanked you like 4 times already, but thank you so much, honestly, for the work that you're doing.
You're good. I love it. I love it. But it's so true. You're going through that process, and you're going through, even if you're just at the beginning of it and thinking about maybe I want to do this. Okay. But you still have all those questions and all that doubt, and you just been through hell. And the last thing you want to do is put yourself through hell again. Because you just want it all to stop. But the only way to really get it to all stop is to go through this. And it sucks, but it's what is required. And so I am happy to be that one at the end who says, hey, no, you just keep going. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm sure everybody's heard it in one regard or another, is, if you're going through hell, keep on going, right? Because why would you stop in hell? I mean, it's the most stupid thing that you could do for yourself, is to stop in hell, So when you're out of that situation and you're facing depression and the abuse or the aftermath of the abuse, excuse me, you're just in the middle of it. Okay. You're in the middle of all of it still. You're not out, you're not free, you're not done. But you got to go through that part, and you've got to face yourself afterwards. And that's the hardest part. It's the hardest part. None of us ever want to face ourselves, even if we haven't been through a situation, right? We don't want to look at ourselves. We don't want to look at our weaknesses. We don't want to look at the things that are going wrong. We just want to present, the best of ourselves to ourselves and to everybody else, because we were taught, we need to validate ourselves through everybody else's approval, and so this is kind of what we're wired to think, what we're wired to do, but you kind of shed all that when you go through this process too. So it's kind of fun afterwards when, you don't have to rely on that from other people anymore and be like, you got work to do. I'm good. I'm good over here. You go do you, I'm going to do me over here. And then, when you're ready, we'll kind of meet over here and we'll have a fun little party when you're ready.
Yeah, I love that. And what a great way to start out this podcast, with just like, here's what's possible for you after you go through the hell, after you go through the work, after you face those demons. Here's what's possible for you. So let's go ahead. Can we make this a little bit personal? I would love to hear your journey and how you got started in doing the work that you're doing.
So getting started in what I'm doing has been really thinking about doing this as a profession and really putting everything out there has been about on my heart for about 5 years. And that was through various, you can call me a little bit weird, but through some various spiritual, I guess, kind of connections and messages, and kind of going through this whole process that I have been through. I've reconnected with my soul, and I've learned how to listen to that intuition and that gut instinct. And that's all stuff that I do teach in my content and in my courses, is how to reconnect with that part of you. But when you do, and you can listen to that, you start picking up on the clues and the things that part of you is telling you that you need to be doing, or what you need to be doing with your life, what direction you need to go. And so about 5 years ago, I started to realize, well, everything in my life is going wrong. unless I'm helping people through these kind of situations, then everything in my life seems to be going right for some reason. So I'm starting to connect the dots then. And I'm like, okay, I think this is why, this is what's going on here. This is why I went through everything. But it took me another 5 years to get to that realization and get to this point where I'm putting it all together. I started slowly buying little pieces of camera equipment over the 5 years and storing it away in my garage. And when the time was right, it was time to pull it all out and then time to put it all together. That was roughly about 5 years ago. So that was 15 years into my healing journey myself. And it took me that long to get from where I had left everything with my adopted family. So it was my adopted family that I had an issue with, and that I had to cut off and get out of my life. And we'll kind of get into that story a little bit. But it was 15 years after that I could finally get to the place where I could talk to people about it and help people through their own situations, realizing that I had done the research. I had looked into dark psychology, narcissism, psychopaths, sociopaths. What's the difference? What are their red flags? What are their motives? Essentially, manipulation. That led me down into a weird kind of side hobby of looking into ancient warfare tactics, which oddly enough tied in very, very well to everything. So you read Sun Tzu and Machiavelli and Musashi, and it just all really, kind of completes the studying of the psychological side of everything, because now you have the strategic side of everything. And it's kind of weird to learn that the human condition hasn't changed much over the centuries, so it's still very relevant, and you can read that material today and apply it to wherever you are in your life, and it's going to make sense, and you're going to have a roadmap on how to get out of or get through whatever you're trying to get through just by looking at these old ancient warfare strategy books. It's so weird. But, I went down that path, and, that's really what brought me out of all of it, and then kind of tied everything together for me. And that's what really gave me the strength in my mentality, and helped me discover my courage and my confidence, which I never had. If you knew me 15 years ago, you would know that I was extremely shy, very non-confrontational, and I was very much a people pleaser. But that was all conditioned in me throughout my childhood from my adopted family, right? And that came from years of, just feeling like I had to people please, and I had to keep these people in my life because nobody wanted me in the beginning, because I was adopted, and I had known my whole life that I was adopted. They adopted me at a really young age, when I was an infant. Kind of a little weird drama around the whole thing was that the gal who adopted me was actually my babysitter. And so there's some kind of interesting story there that I never got, but she ended up adopting me away from my biological mother. And there was all sorts of accusations of neglect and abuse, and how, she would bring me back to my adopted mom after a weekend, and I would be in the same clothes, same diaper that I had left with, like on a Friday, and would return on Monday in the same stuff. One day, the tipping point was my adopted mother had to rush me to the hospital because I was turning colors and screaming bloody murder. So she ran me to the hospital while my mother was at work, and found out that she had run out of formula and decided to feed me a can of chili before taking me to the babysitter for the day. And so that was kind of the final straw. And that's when the state kind of stepped in and said, okay, you're done. And they put me in her care. At the time, she was a foster mother. Now, going back, and after doing all of my processing and everything, and especially at this point in my life, I don't blame a lot of what had happened on my mother. My adopted mother, was actually a victim of the mental abuse and manipulation herself. She didn't know how to escape it. She didn't know how to handle it. And looking back, I've gained a lot of forgiveness for her over everything that had happened, and we'll kind of go into a little bit more. But she was a victim of it all herself. And in the moment, though, I blamed her for everything. But when
Of
we're
course, yeah.
angry and we're looking at our situations and we're looking for somebody to blame, it's whoever's in our line of sight, essentially. Whoever's involved, it's all your fault, right? And that tends to be what happens. But this is where the reflection really helps. This is why looking at all of this stuff, even multiple times throughout your life after it's done, really helps, because now I have a different understanding today than I did when I first started this journey. And I have a new appreciation for her that I didn't have before. So, always go back to these situations, even if you think you've healed yourself from them and you've processed them. That's just a little side advice.
Yeah, no, that's great.
But anyway, so yeah, I ended up getting taken away and adopted. And then it was so much moving around. She had several different boyfriends, had left my adopted dad. They had divorced and moved me out to Kansas, where she had remarried. To my stepdad, who was just a lowlife and didn't really want to work or do anything like that. She was physically disabled, couldn't really work herself. And so by the age of 11, I was working part-time to help support the family. By age 13,
Wow.
I was working full-time to help support the family while he would stay at home and just pretty much sleep all day and eat potato chips. And kind of a weird thing, potato chip crunching was like a weird trigger for me for the longest time. I couldn't be around
Mhm.
anybody who could eat them. I can now. We're over it. But it was because of that. But yeah, 13 years old, I'm working full time washing dishes at this little cafe in this small town, getting paid under the table because they can pay me super cheap because I'm a kid. And that's pretty much how I help the family get by. So we're constantly getting our lights turned off, constantly having no food, my mother in and out of the hospital. And then one day when I'm 16 years old, I had come home from work after a pretty long shift. I had closed down the restaurant and walked the 2 miles home about 11 o'clock at night. And I come home and my mom is not there. And my stepdad is emptying the house and filling up his car with his son, which is my stepbrother. And I found out that my mother had been put in the hospital, and I hadn't known any of this. And he said that he was leaving her. He couldn't do this anymore. And so here I was with him by myself at this house. I couldn't go to the hospital. The visiting hours were over. They wouldn't let me go. I couldn't get a hold of her. They had like some kind of call limit or time or whatever. I couldn't get a hold of her. And so I decided to take off and go to my boyfriend's house at the time. And very stupidly, we just took off for 2 days. And I couldn't get a hold of anybody. I just didn't care. I wasn't going to stick around while he emptied out our entire house and pretty much robbed us. I wasn't going to stick around and watch that. So I left, and we were gone for about 2 days. Didn't know, had all the police looking for us. My mom had figured out that I was missing, and they were looking for stepdad because he was the last person to really see me. So, it was kind of like, oops, I didn't mean for all that to happen. And so I come home and then realize, kind of they had a big fight. She had gotten on him because, I was doing all the work. She was trying to stand up for me, and then he kind of blew up and then just took off at that point. And so that was really kind of the first big blow up moment I had ever had in my life, but very complacent in who I was and very non-confrontational in who I was. I always did the work. I never complained about doing the work, and I never complained about, handing over the paycheck to the family, even though it really hurt. That kind of life, though, did put a depression on me, and I didn't understand that's what was going on. I just knew that I was very sad, and my mother did too. And she tried to help and send me to doctors for depression and whatnot, and they put me on medication. But you'll do the studying and researching on this medication now. They don't give this to teenagers anymore because it now provokes those unaliving, I guess, thoughts in a person,
Mhm.
in a teenager. And I had that. And then I had moments where I would attempt with those very pills that they gave me that were supposed to help me. And so that was a whole other, snowball of, crap that we were dealing with on top of it. But she thought she was helping me. In the time before, though, I always thought it was kind of a way to control me, is kind of how I looked at it. When I first started processing, she was trying to control me by putting me on medication to make me feel happy in my crappy situation, was kind of how I looked at it. But she was very genuinely concerned for the behaviors that she was seeing from me. And so fast forward several years, we end up moving out to California, and I have a brother, which is her only biological son. And he brought us in after the stepdad had left. I had gotten a couple years of living as an adolescent. And of course, I did all the stupid things that I could, because for the first time I was free and I could do all the stupid teenager things, right? And I did. And I spent most of my time at rock and roll shows and all that fun stuff and partying and, getting into trouble because, that's kind of what was fun. That's what made me feel good. It's what I thought I needed to do. And, met the wrong people, made the wrong decisions, married the wrong person, and actually ended up in almost a physically abusive situation. But I noticed things very, very quickly, and I left pretty damn quick. We were married for about 6 months. And things got very volatile. I learned that he had some ties to some gangs that I didn't know about beforehand.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And he told me he had a life like that at one point, but he didn't anymore. So fed me that line of, oh, I'm not that guy no more kind of stuff. And I believed it. Right. And so, I escaped that and I moved up to Oregon from California, where my brother had moved. And I moved in with him. And we were going to be roommates for a while, and I was going to pick my life back up. And we're like, okay, this is going to work out, and I'll pay half the rent and blah, blah, blah. 1 year after I moved up there, he quits his job and decides that he is going to spend his time trying to become the next RuPaul drag queen. And he's going to spend his time and his money to do that. Cool. Great. 5 years goes by. And I'm supporting the habit and I'm supporting the dream. I'm a single mother making $13.50 an hour, and I'm supporting all the bills at this time. So I'm back in the same situation where I'm the one doing all the work, and I'm getting fed all the excuses and all of the reasons why he can't get a job. Well, I'm overqualified. No, I'm underqualified. Nobody wants to talk to me. And all the while, spending all of my money out at the nightclubs and out at the bars, trying to build up this career, all of the money going to fabric and dresses and crowns and jewelry and makeup and to build this persona for him. And, in the beginning, I really, okay, cool. I didn't mind helping. But when it turned into 5 years and no willingness to go out and bring in any kind of money to help as well, that's when things started to get really bad. Then it was, okay, Amy, there's something wrong with you. You're very depressed. Got me into mental health again. They put me on mental health medications again. At this point, my mom had moved back in. So she was very concerned, started seeing the depression come out in me again, and suggested that I go. And now I've got both of these two, my mother and my adopted brother, feeding information to my mental health providers. And at one point, they had diagnosed me with bipolar disorder, and put me on the meds for that. Didn't help, made things a lot worse. Then they changed and said, okay, maybe it's just a major depressive disorder. So changed up the meds again and put me on everything for that. Okay, maybe it's just a major anxiety disorder. All the time, nothing working. All the time going through different therapies. All the time still working my ass off full time to pay for all of this and for everybody else and their dreams of conquering, the runway.
Yeah.
And so finally, one day I had gotten a phone call at work that I was going to get my car repossessed. Okay. And I freaked out because it was the only way that I could get to work. And I was the only breadwinner. And I worked an hour away from where I lived. And so I'm like, shit, what is going on? because I'm giving all of my money to my family to pay the bills. They're doing this part for me, so I didn't have to worry about it, right? I find out nothing's getting paid. And the car is getting repossessed, the lights are getting turned off, the water's getting turned off, rent is behind. And so I had a major panic attack when I was at work. My boss told me to get out of here because I was no good. I was no good to anybody that day. Just clock out and go home. I didn't go home. I went to urgent care and I wanted some Xanax. I needed to calm down so I could think through what my next move was going to be. And that was just my only goal was to calm down. Because I couldn't, I just couldn't, and then I had I was worried about my son too, he's just 3 years old and we're just finding out that he has autism on top of it. And so I had all of this cycling and coming down on me and the pressure, and I end up in urgent care and I go and I talk to this doctor. I'd never seen him before. Never heard of him, never seen him. And he's looking through my chart, ask me a little bit about what's going on, because you can see I'm clearly distressed, like majorly distressed, having issues, like there is something going on. And I told him, I just need a little bit of Xanax. I need to calm down. I'm having a major panic and anxiety attack. This is what's going on. I need to calm down so I can think about my next move and what I'm going to do. And that doctor put down his notebook or paper or file or whatever he had. And he looked right at me and he said, Amy, you've been on all these mental health medications in the past. None of them fixed the problem. Most of them made the problems worse. You've been through all these therapy programs and you're here today looking for some Xanax to calm down, which I could clearly see that you need. But at what point are you going to realize that nothing is going to change and nothing is going to help until you change your situation and you get these freeloading people out of your life? When are you going to realize that? I can give you the Xanax today, but you're going to be back here next week for more. And I can tell you what your life is going to look like in 5 to 10 years if you keep going down this path. Either you're going to end up in the streets or you're going to end up dead, one of the two. You're going to be so addicted to this stuff, or you're going to be so out of your mind, from these mental health medications screwing you up so bad because you don't need them. You don't have these mental conditions, and he's looking in the notes, and my mental health providers were already making notes that they thought that I was being controlled by this family because there was a lot of them calling in concerned with me and about behaviors that the doctors weren't necessarily seeing. And so they would call in and say, I think she's schizophrenic. I think she has this issue, that issue. I think she's really crazy and I think we need to do something. And so they already were thinking that was kind of helping, that was happening, and that was kind of in my charts already. And so he had saw it. He was the only one to first come out and tell me about it. And it hit me like a freaking truck. And I was, well, what the hell do I do now? I mean, these are the only people that I know, the only family that I had, my mother and my brother. Everybody else was gone. So it was just me, my mother, my brother, and my son. And so if I cut these two people out of my life, I have nobody. There's nobody. Okay. I have zero biological family. Rest of the adopted family had written us all off due to some other drama. And so that's what I was looking at. And it took me 6 months to finally get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm kicking at least the brother out. I'll take care of mom. I'm kicking the brother out. He is a fully capable grown man. He can go take care of himself. He can go figure it out. I wrote him a letter. You got 30 days to find a new place or to find a job or something. 30 days came around. He hadn't made one phone call or submitted one application. And I went to go kick him out, and my mom came out crying, begging me not to do it, not to make her son homeless. And I didn't realize what I was doing to her. It was her only biological son, and she was struggling with that. And I can understand that as a mother. But at the time, I'm like, okay, well, you're choosing sides here is what you're doing now, Mom. So if you're going to choose his side, then you and him are going to figure this out together, and I'm going to leave. And that's what I ended up doing. And so I ended up having zero access to my finances because I was cut off from it. I had no money, and my job had put me on a leave, so I had to come up with some money. And so I found some services that got me and my son into an apartment. They paid for the first month's rent and for the security deposit, but I had 30 days to come up with the next month's rent and any kind of food we were going to have for the next month. Never mind the fact we had zero beds, zero furniture, nothing, just the clothes that were in our closet is all that I could take with me. And by the grace of God or the universe or whatever, 2 days later, I got a job waitressing and I was making tips and I had my rent within 5 days. And then, I could get free food. And because of where I was working, they offered me and my son free meals once a day. So we came in once a day to eat. And so that's how we got through, the first week. And then after the next week, I had tips that I could go and I could buy food for us. And then I could start to buy, a bed for him. We were sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor of this apartment. So I got him a bed. And then slowly, as more people in the restaurant learned about what was going on with me, a lot of the customers, it was an elderly community. All of a sudden, I had like 20 grandparents, and they were all contributing, a little extra money to help us out and to help us furnish the apartment or give us things that we needed for the kitchen and whatnot. And so it was through this little community that, we were able to get that launching off point to really build life again. And then I was like, okay, I'm safe and I'm good. The doctors had started taking me off of all the medications safely. It's nothing that I just quit taking. They lowered me off like you're supposed to, so we didn't have any more issues. And I haven't taken any of those kind of medications since. Okay. Since I realized that's what was going on, and I realized that the depression was just my soul telling me, you are not happy, something has to change. But I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that at the time at all. And the anxiety was absolutely the fear and the depression, of where am I going to be able to figure this all out on my own? And those medications, all they were doing was either fueling the problem or, suppressing the solution and keeping me in this state of mind where I couldn't figure anything out and keeping me trapped. And so getting off of everything, my head got clear. And then the depression hits again, because now I'm looking back at everything that had happened. And now I'm looking at being alone. I have no family, and that's hitting me hard, that I've got nobody to turn to. Even though I had this small little community, I'm like, well, I have no roots. I don't know who I am. I don't know shit about me. I really don't. Mm-hmm. And that hit hard. And so that's when I started to really study everything. And I said, okay, well, at the very least, I'm going to learn about what happened to me and educate myself. Because I think I need that kind of understanding in order to get over a lot of this. And so I could replace the anxiety and depression with opening a book and learning about the manipulation that had happened and the toxicity that was going on and the abuse that was happening, because I didn't know it was abuse at the time. I didn't know it at all. Like we're talking about, a lot of people don't understand it because there is no physical abuse happening. But it is very much a form of abuse. And this is where I'm so happy a lot of these topics and a lot of this conversation is coming out more and more people are coming out and talking about it. And it's becoming more prevalent because we can stop really bad things from happening a lot sooner with people just knowing the red flags and knowing that this is a form of abuse as well. So that was a long story, but that's kind of where everything started and where I've been and kind of where this whole journey kind of started and took me. And here I am now.
Yeah, and it has been such a journey for you to get here. There's, a couple of things, so many different directions I feel like we can go. One thing that I just want to take a second and double click on is that a lot of our healthcare systems are set up to kind of give you a band-aid symptom
Hmm.
solution. Let's treat the
Yeah.
symptoms and let's not treat the root cause. And I
Hmm.
just love that you had a doctor who was willing to say, Amy, you have a root cause that is not being addressed and you have to fix that. And like, I don't know who this doctor is, but major, major, major props to them because that is such a hard thing to say to people, but everybody needs somebody in their life who will say it.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
everybody needs that person in their life.
Hmm.
So amazing that you had that doctor who was willing to stand up and say that. I want to go back to what you were saying really quick about how it's hard to recognize abuse because sometimes it doesn't come in the form of bruises or broken bones. And so what would you say are some of the red flags that people could watch out for? What were some of the things that you can go back in your own journey now and say, "Oh, that was abuse." What are some of those things?
Well, and my situation was even more precarious and more difficult to point out because, the entire time that I was growing up with these people, it was, we chose you. We love you. Okay. We got to choose you. Most people don't get to choose their kids, but we got to choose you. So you're special and we love you. And so it was, covered up by this, I don't know, over I don't know, expression of love, this over caring, I guess, this
This love bombing.
overprotectiveness, this love bombing, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was my whole growing up and my whole life. They had always told me that I was very special, but on the other end, here I am working my ass off for them, to bring home the paycheck.
Hmm.
So of course, oh yeah, you're very special, right? Of course, we're going to tell you you're special. You're bringing home the bacon, lady. That's great.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that those were the red flags. And in that moment, though, you don't recognize that,
Hmm.
especially when, you have a lot of abandonment issues dealing with the
Hmm.
adoption and dealing with, a neglectful biological mother. And you hear the stories about her, you never met her. And you just kind of know a little bit about her. You know that she didn't know who your father was, so there was no chasing that down. So, I mean, so you think, okay, these people, they selected me and they love me. And that was just a big wool over my eyes. And I don't doubt that they loved me. I don't
Hmm.
doubt that at all, but they did have their other motives. Just like I think that sometimes in these abusive situations, yeah, there is love there, in a twisted kind of way. It's kind of where
Hmm.
it all starts out at first, but then it turns into something else because of issues that other people haven't dealt with, or they've got their own demons that they're dealing with for sure. But absolutely the love bombing, and then of course they cut me off from my finances. And so there was that blinding, we're going to take care of everything for you. You don't have to worry about it. We're going to take care of this. And then
Yeah.
I had zero idea of what was going on. All the mail was getting hidden from me, so I didn't know that the car was going to get repossessed. I didn't know the lights were getting turned off. I didn't know we were about to get evicted because that was just all being kept from me. And so getting the finances taken away from me, having zero access to my bank account, that was a huge red flag. I should have absolutely known.
Yeah.
And then, the constant lying and the constant manipulation of, and the betrayal, um, all the huge red flags are there. And we got to understand that, people are human too. So this is where it gets tricky because we don't want to
Hmm.
accuse people of being abusive when they're not necessarily. Everybody has narcissistic tendencies. Everybody has, abusive tendencies, whether they know it or not, or, can be manipulative, whether they realize they're doing it or not. And this is where we start to question ourselves. But the real thing to tell if it's really abuse or just personality flaw, or they made a mistake, is the consistency. Does it continue to happen?
Hmm.
Okay, are you continuing to come to them and they're continuing to apologize for doing the same things over and over again? Are they continuing to put you in the same situation? Do they have zero respect to change the issues that you're having and that you're bringing up with them? That's another big red flag. And so there's so many, and I wrote a guide called "From Confusion to Clarity: 10 Signs of a Manipulative or Mentally Abusive Relationship." And it's got the 10 most common signs that you can notice, the really early warning signs of the abuse, where they're being manipulative, and where they're being mentally abusive, financially abusive, the isolation. That was another part that I really didn't talk about was, my friends were warning me the whole time about my brother and my mother, but I was ignoring them. And then I would go home and I would say, hey, you know what? You know what? Sally said about you guys today. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, we want to tell you about Sally. And then the next thing I
Mhm.
know, no, she's no good for you. She's going to put you right back into the position that you were in before you moved up here. And so, no, you're making bad choices again with your friends. And so then next thing I know, I had no friends, and the friends that I did have, they got tired of hearing it because I was complaining all the time about my situation. And so, by the end of it, I just had nobody. Since I've reconnected with a lot of them, and apologized to them for not, thanking them for being who they were and trying to, save me back then, and then apologizing for not listening. And I've reconnected with them, and all of them are super excited to see that I'm doing this now. And they're like super proud that I'm standing up and I'm talking about it, and that I've had the courage to get away from it all. And so it's been a really cool journey to get reconnected with a lot of those people.
Yeah, amazing. One of the hardest experiences I've ever had in my entire life was watching my best friend go into a really abusive relationship and have her not be ready to hear it. And I just want to highlight this part of your journey that like it takes a long time. It takes a long time to recognize that the people that you loved and who have loved you and filled a need, a lot of times these abusers can like capitalize on these unmet needs and then constantly be refilling that unmet need so you feel like you have to keep going back for more. You feel like you're not worthy of anything else, and they're very good at constantly giving you enough good times, giving you enough of that validation that it's harder to see that abuse.
Mhm.
And so just like for any of the people who are listening who are loving on somebody who is going through abuse, just know that your job right now is to constantly be building the safety net so when they're ready, they have somewhere to go. Be
That's the key, when they're
yeah.
ready. Unfortunately, when they're ready, we like to think that, if we just give them the information, we're like ringing the bells and we're like, you are headed in the wrong direction. This person is going to do horrible things to you and destroy your life.
Mhm.
They're not going to listen until they're ready to hear it. And that's the really sad part, and I know I lived it, but there is that question because, we do have that weakness within us that we don't want the confrontation. We are unsure of ourselves. Okay. And so the combination of that alone
Yeah.
keeps us from acting, and keeps us questioning, and then they're putting into you that you don't know what you're doing and what you're talking about. I
Mhm.
know everything best for you. And that's all part of it. That's all part of the conditioning and the rewiring that they are working on, and then we got to
Yeah.
understand that they chose us because there was a weakness within us that they could exploit.
Yeah.
Sad, but it's the truth. But this is why it's so important after leaving to go through this and discover what that is and work on that in yourself. Because if you don't, you're gonna end up in the same situations again. We have
Yeah.
those friends who have, ended up in the same relationship type over and over and over again.
Mhm.
She falls for the same kind of guy. Here we go again. And it's because of that. They haven't worked on that part. And it's glaringly obvious to an abuser. And they capitalize on it.
Yeah, and they're very good at finding those things. They're very good at finding those unmet needs.
Yep.
And I'm sure, and I know that you've talked about this like on your Instagram page. I saw some content on this, but I'm sure there's a big element of like feeling stupid and feeling guilty that it took so long and that you let it get so far. And I know there was like you just said in your own journey, like that should have been a big red flag that I just couldn't see because you were in it and you lived it. And it's even harder when it's the way you were raised because you literally were taught to have these expectations that people would treat you this way, that people would just sit around at home and you would have to provide for them. And so it's even harder. And like that can make it harder to leave too because your brain doesn't want to face the fact that, hey, we were wrong and we
Mm-hmm.
dedicated so many years to these people who took advantage of us. And that is a hard, painful thing to process. So how were you able to address that in yourself, acknowledge that, and find the courage to actually leave?
Well, I realized that I wasn't stupid. I was tricked. And there's a difference. I was a straight A student at school. And that's one of the reasons that I had to do the studying because I knew that I was a smart person. I knew that I wasn't an idiot. So how the hell did I fall for all of this? And it was because of these personality flaws that I had in myself that came from way back from being adopted and the inability to disconnect from people or what is it? Abandonment issues. I don't know why that word was so hard right now. But no, the abandonment issues and it all went back to that from the adoption. And I didn't know that that was messing with me as hard as it was. But that's where doing this work on ourselves really helps. And when you're in that situation and like I had to just consciously override my nervous system. So when I was facing my family and saying I ain't putting up with this no more, my nerves were going off the chart, and everything inside of me was saying, retreat, retreat, retreat. Okay.
Yeah.
But I had to override that. I had to find that strength within myself. And I was pissed off enough and angry enough and disgusted enough with my situation that I could find the strength and the courage to say, I'm done. And afterwards, at the time, I was a pretty heavy smoker because I thought that it helped with my anxiety. Found out, no, that triggered it a lot. But afterwards, after it all was all said and done, and everybody blew up, and we went our separate ways, I smoked about a pack of cigarettes to try to calm myself back down because my nerves were just so rattled, and I was shaking so bad from the adrenaline of the fight. I'd never really experienced that before because I'd never confronted anybody before. And then, the nervousness from just my everything in me just being nervous for this confrontation and everything in me saying, don't do this, don't do it. Don't do it. You can't do it. You don't have it in you to do it. But you have to come to that point where you're pissed off enough and you're disgusted enough that you're going to override that part of yourself, and you're going to do it consciously. It's not going to happen instinctually. You've got to make that conscious choice of nope, we're doing this. I don't care what you're saying. We're going for it. And that's what it
Amazing.
takes.
Yeah, and that's so incredible. Like, not to minimize that at all. That is so much work and so painful. Okay, so now kind of like wrapping up, winding down this podcast episode. Obviously, there is so much more that I want to talk to you about, but I just know that, I mean, you have other things to get going to, and nobody wants to sit and listen to us talk for 6 hours.
I know, right?
So, what would you leave people with? Like, as people have maybe left these situations or are starting to recognize that they need to leave, what would be the next steps to fully being able to free yourself from this situation?
You've got to strategize. It is a strategy, especially if you're looking at leaving. Okay, you've got a lot that you've got to strategize and you've got to plan out. Okay, so that you can make sure that you're taken care of, and you can make sure that you've got that net that's going to catch you when the depression does hit, because it is going to hit. And so just be prepared for it. The more that you strategize and the more that you plan, okay, then the more you're prepared for what's coming and what's going to happen, because it is going to happen. The depression is going to happen. The anxiety is going to happen. The trust issues, the why me, the self-worth, it's gonna hit you, and it's gonna hit you hard. Okay. And so you seek out creators that maybe you like to listen to that offer good advice. There's some good motivational speakers out there. One person that kind of helped me through this, never met him a day in my life, is kind of an old school motivational speaker by the name of Jim Rohn. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's
Yep.
passed, but having grown up with not much of a family, in my head, that man was my grandpa. And so listening to him was like getting grandfatherly advice that I so desperately needed that I'd never had before in my life. I never, even with the adopted family, I never had grandparents. So I never got to experience that. So, just finding ways to interject that kind of stuff into your life so that you do have ways to pull yourself out of it. The depression is always going to come back, even when you work on yourself. So even today, okay, the depression comes back, the anxiety comes back to me. Okay, but I know what it looks like when it's coming. I know what it feels like, and I know what I need to do to pull myself out of it and put myself back on track to continue to go forward. And that's the biggest thing that I really like to get through to people who come across my content or attend any of my courses, is that the pain is always going to be there. Always going to be there. It never goes away. So if you get a healer online who's like, I can 100% cure your problems, or we can 100% heal you, they're feeding you bullshit, and they're taking your money and running to the bank and laughing, and taking advantage of you. But you're never going to be 100% healed, so understand that, and that's okay. The pain is always going to come back, but that's why we study. That's why we work on ourselves. That's why we do the reflection. And that's why we find out what works to pull ourselves back out of it, because we do have value. We do have purpose. We do have passions. Okay. And we need to get back to that. We don't want to stay in that depressed state, but just understand it's going to come back. Be prepared for it. The more you're prepared for it, then the easier it is to get through. So like, I know when the depression hits, there is something in my life that is off. And I need to look at what is going on, and am I going in the right direction, or do I need to course correct and go a different direction now? Because clearly something isn't working, because it's off within me. That's what these emotions are. They are our GPS system. These bad emotions, these negative emotions, they're telling us, hey, this ain't right for you. Even when we're in those abusive situations, we're getting told that by our emotions, right? But we're not listening, or we've learned to not trust it, sometimes by the abuser and sometimes by our own doing. And then that's something else that you get to figure out on your journey. Did the abuser rewire me for that? Or did I just never believe that I could trust my gut, my intuition, myself? And if that's the case, then right there, I can tell you that's what the abuser has absolutely targeted in you. And that's what you need to work on, is learning to trust that in yourself. And I've got exercises that I've been through that can help with that too. And so I had to do that for myself. I've been through a ton of these exercises. And so I provide a lot of them for people to just really help them through some of this. Sometimes you just got to try different exercises and try different things, and then eventually you're going to find what works. You just got to keep trying. Just one or two things doesn't work, it's okay. There's something else out there. There's something else out there. Just keep going.
Absolutely. Yes, could not agree more. There is no one size fits all answer to healing, to any of this journey that people are going through. I know, Amy, you have a ton of resources for people. So where would be the best place for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I get a lot of resources posted on Facebook. I've got the Passion from Pain page, and also the group, which is called the Survivors Inner Circle. And so a lot more detailed or intricate information is posted in that group. The page just kind of advertises more about the course and whatnot. And then also I've getting a decent following on TikTok finally. And I'm just starting to post on Instagram. I kind of ignored it for a while, but just getting around to Instagram. And then we have my website, which is passionfrompain.com. And there's a ton of resources on there as well. And so classes as well and webinars. And this Friday, I've got a webinar coming up that I'll be talking about finding strength after toxicity and how to find that within yourself.
Beautiful, Amy. I will make sure that I have all of those links down in the show notes below. Thank you so much for your time and everything that you've been through, bearing your heart and sharing your journey with us today.
Thank you so much.
Oh, hey, you made it to the end of this episode. Thanks for hanging out with us and listening. We hope you are now feeling inspired to go out and design your own life.
We would love to get to know you better. So sign up for a free coffee chat with us so we can hang out, talk about your goals, and how we can help you get there.
All you need to do is head down to the description section of this episode and click on the coffee chat button.
All right, chat soon.